Hi everyone! I am so excited to present to you the 9th installation in our Famous Artist series. This one is all about Claude Monet. The purpose of this video is to just give you an overview of how I've set up this unit so that when you start it with your kiddos, you can hit the ground running. So let's dive right in. The unit I've organized into 4 sessions, ideally 40 minutes each. Of course, if your setting has different time constraints, it should be adaptable. I've tried to keep a lot of the components somewhat flexible. So just get a layout of how it works and then see how you can make it work for your setting. Okay, so for the first session, you're going to be presenting a digital storybook. And in the digital storybook, you're going to be presenting a ton of paintings by Claude Monet, and you're going to be giving kids just this general overview of, what his interests were as an artist. They'll learn that he was incredibly interested in the way light and the weather and the season affect the way things look outside. He was notorious for painting the same things over and over in different lighting. So you'll take a look at his haystacks that were near his house in France. And he did so many paintings of those haystacks, and in each one they kind of have this unique feel because of how the lighting was at the moment that he painted it. You'll also learn that he painted outside a lot. Get the kids kind of familiar with the term plein air painting, and you will also help them understand that he was not just an artist, he was also somewhat of a horticulturalist. He was super interested in botany, plants, gardening. He set up his own massive garden, which is still open to the public to this day. And he made many, many paintings in that garden. He also added on a water garden. And that water garden, it ultimately emerged as something pretty critical in his body of work. He did more than 300 paintings of the water lilies and the bridge that he had built over this pond that was all on his property in France. And so after taking a look at all of these works and kind of talking to the kids about these different facets of Claude Monet, you're going to have them do a plein air exercise where you're actually going to give them clipboards and paper and some drawing materials. I'd stick with dry just to keep it simple, meaning crayons, markers, colored pencils, that kind of thing, and have them step outside. And it's not as critical that they come up with a masterpiece in 10 to 15 minutes outside, but what you want them doing is sitting down and kind of looking at the world around them and just kind of experiencing what that would have been like for Claude Monet to be sitting outside attempting to make a work of art. What do things look like outside? How is the sunlight affecting things? How is the wind affecting things? How's the season affecting the way things look right now? So you really just want them to have that plein air experience, and you can kind of let them know there's tons of artists still well beyond Claude Monet that work in this format outside. And so that once you get that done, I would recommend, if time permits, have them share what they created in their plein air exercise with minimally you, but ideally with a classmate, just to kind of show off what they came up with. And that'll wrap up session 1. So for session 2, you're going to be reading them a story called, it's like a children's story book called The Magical Garden of Claude Monet. And I believe it's by Lawrence Anholt. And if you cannot find a copy in your own collection or in a library near you or online, there are a lot of read-alouds on YouTube, so you could go that route. In fact, many of you know I'm a huge fan of the YouTube read-alouds because that frees you up to get some materials prepped and ready while the kids are watching someone else read the story. But your choice. It's a cute story, and it really highlights the idea of Monet as a gardener and an artist. And so you'll have the kids enjoy that story, and then you're going to have them start, excuse me, you're going to have them start the studio project. Now, you're ultimately going to be working with the kids to create a water lily. And they may or may not be familiar with water lilies from their own life. So you definitely want to talk to them about what that is and how a water lily grows in a pond and how that's actually a flower and all of that. But you're going to be doing this project, they're going to be doing this project in stages. It involves paint, it involves coloring, it involves cutting and gluing. But the paint happens first and the paint needs time to dry. So for this first section of the studio project, we're going to be painting with some sponge brushes on paper plates. And you're going to need one large paper plate. This is a 9-inch paper plate. And I really actually like this. Is kind of like, if you can tell, like a kind of a cheap paper plate. Not your best thing at like a picnic, but perfect for an art project. And you're going to need one of these larger size ones and then 4 of the smaller 6-inch size if possible. Now, of course, if you can't find this kind of thin paper plate, other ones will work, but the reason I recommend these is because they're thin. It's a lot easier for kids to cut these, which is what they're going to be doing in the following session. So I also like that they don't have that real coated waxy surface because the paint will sit on them really nicely. So you're going to just drop a little bit of blue and a little bit of green tempera paint on here and give the student a sponge brush. And their job is to just mix those colors right there on the plate and spread it out all over the plate. You want like full coverage. Now this one I had just used pure blue. I was testing out a couple. If you don't have green or you're limited on colors, it's ultimately going to represent water. So have fun with that. That's the big plate. You don't need to paint the other side, just the front. And then the next thing you're going to do is move on to the smaller plates. Now, ultimately, one of these is going to become a lily pad. I have kind of a finished one on deck. So before you do any cutting, though, that needs to get painted. I put on mine a little squirt of green and a little squirt of yellow. I have like little color recipes in the slideshow that you can reference. But you just put a little bit of each, have them use a fresh sponge brush, and just spread that out fully on the front of the plate. They don't need to paint the back. And then they're going to follow this with 3 other plates. And the 3 other ones ultimately build the lily itself. One is going to be bright yellow, one is going to be dark pink, and one will be light pink. So for the dark pink and light pink, I recommend using red with a little bit of white for the dark pink, and then white with a little bit of red for the light pink. And ultimately, you end up with colors that kind of look like, this. You just, how different they are, what shade of pink is pretty flexible. And then ultimately one will be yellow. But these are pre-cut. You're originally, on that first round of painting, these are full plates that you're working on. So once you get those painted, you're going to need to just leave them out to dry. You will, depending on how thin they spread the paint, you want to encourage them to spread it pretty thin. Because with tempera paint, if it dries gloppy, you get a little bit of textured cracking and stuff, which ultimately we want to try to avoid. So for this one, spread it out, but it'll still take, 30-40 minutes to dry. So that's why I do the rest in the follow-up session. But if you have a little bit of longer time, you could potentially just power through and keep working on those as soon as the plates are dry. I have for the end of session 2, if you have a little bit of time at the end, I am offering this, which is a little handout, and it links to the story, the Magical Garden of Claude Monet, and it says a special lily in the water garden. Make one of the water lilies in this water garden stand out from the others. How will you do it? And so you're just kind of playing with the idea. First of all, like, how does a water lily look? What's going on here? And you want them just coloring. Now, I had a couple kids try this the other day, and one went for markers, and his special, I just found this so fascinating, his special lily that he created was like his own fresh one in the middle. Like, that's not part of the original handout. So, like, you just don't know what you're going to get. And I had another little girl who went for crayons, and, well, I just find it fascinating that she made all the other ones gray, And then this one, she just went berserk on. She just added so much, and that was her way of kind of playing with the idea of emphasis. And so it's just an extra add-on if time permits, to get them kind of familiar with the shape of a water lily. Now, when they are working on that, you are basically reaching the end of session 2. So for session 3, you're going to start out with 2 quick fun facts, and then you're going to dive right into the studio work again. And there is a lot of studio work in session 3, so you really want to be kind of prepared and efficient about how you handle session 3's studio section. So you're going to take stencils. So it's broken into basically 3 phases: a tracing and cutting phase, an embellishing phase, and a layering and gluing phase. And I have step-by-step directions in the slideshow of all of those, but I just wanted to real quick talk about the stencils. I offer 2 stencil options, and as you can see, one of these is a tiny bit more complex than the other. So I would recommend stick with simple for your really little guys, the ones in the 4-year-old range, and then anyone who's like more like end of 1st grade, 2nd grade can definitely handle this. Some of your younger kids might be able to handle this one, but you are basically layering this onto your paper plates. And again, this one's already been cut, but you layer that onto and trace it onto the plates, and then have them cut it out. And so you could print this onto like more like cardstock to make it just a little bit sturdier for tracing. But they trace one of these on, like the large one on the dark pink plate, the medium one on the light pink plate, and then the smallest one on the yellow plate. And then they got to cut those out. So it becomes a test of endurance because they're cutting 3 of them out, especially for really little guys. That's a lot of cutting. It's excellent cutting practice, but it's a test of endurance. So that's why I say steer clear of this one for your really little kids, because they may just most likely get a little bit overwhelmed by all that cutting. So once they get them cut, though, you are going to kind of just stack them and set them aside, and you're going to move on to the lily pad. And so the lily pad, ultimately, there's a step-by-step guide on this. This one doesn't have a stencil. You're kind of just guiding them to make a dot in the middle of the plate, and a dot here and a dot here, and they just kind of cut a big chunk, a big triangle out of the plate. And then it's just optional if they want to curve that kind of pointy edge right there. And that's it for the lily pad. And so they'll start to see it kind of coming together. And then if you had your plate, aha, we're getting closer, we're building this thing. So that's just the first step. Cutting, tracing and cutting is step number 1 in this session. Step number 2 is all about embellishing. Now, this is an optional step, so if you are crunched for time, you could skip this whole step, but kids seem to enjoy adding a little bit of embellishments with oil pastels right on top of the paint. And so I'll show you this guy, and I have pictures in the slideshow too, but just this blue layer becomes water. So you can put out some light blue or dark blue or even white or gray oil pastels and have them draw directly on the plate. You're doing this before it's all glued together. Now this one's glued, but if you can kind of see, there's some on the lily pad, some yellow, white, and dark green embellishments on that lily pad, and again, step-by-step directions on that. I didn't do any embellishing on the flower, but if a kid wanted to, you certainly could do that. Oil pastels are oily. You just want to make sure the kids keep their fingers away from their eyes while they're working with oil pastels, and give them a chance to wash their hands real good afterwards. Then you move on to the layering and gluing stage. And I've suggested this before, and it's totally your call, but for layering, ultimately, that's the layer. Blue, then green, and then dark pink, light pink, yellow. But when you're gluing, you don't need a ton of glue, but I am recommending school glue, which is like the wet white glue. And little guys especially tend to seriously overdo it when it comes to wet glue. The bottles are kind of big and they squeeze and they just don't know when is enough, and it's usually way too much that they end up using. So I like to take school glue and just squeeze like a little puddle on a piece of cardboard or just even a scrap paper, and then hand them a Q-tip. and they dip in and they kind of just apply a little swirl or X of glue, and that's all they need. So it just kind of helps reinforce that idea that less is more when it comes to glue. So then they glue that on, and that's it. That will take you to the end of session 3. So that moves on to session 4, which is the very last session for this project. And for session 4, you're going to start off with the very last step for the studio project, and it involves a crayon. And here's one. Oh, did I mention this big black paper? That's also in session 2. You want to kind of secure the whole thing to a large black piece of paper. It makes it kind of fun to display it. It's optional. You don't need it, but I kind of like that extra feature. But see how these petals are curling up? The way that I got that to happen was by winding the petal around. It's kind of hard for me to show this with in the video format, but I have pictures of it in the slideshow. But you just wind it around a crayon. You could use a marker. You could use your pinky finger. You're just basically kind of training, just like if you were curling a ribbon, you're training that paper to kind of curl up. It doesn't need to curl tight. These are not curly cues. You just need it generally moving upward. So if they're struggling with how do you wind that around a crayon, they can literally take their fingers and just sort of bend them up, and that also works. And that's it for the studio project. So once you get that done, it's time to do a quick review. I offer one in the slideshow that has them giving a thumbs up if the statement is true, and I don't know, or no, that's a false statement. And so there's a handful of true and false statements. You can do reviews in any way you want. That's a suggestion. I put in some blank slides if you want to have them, if you want to kind of customize the review to however your discussion went. And then you're going to have them do an art show. And of course, art shows, in my opinion, are one of the best parts. You have them spread out all these lily pads all over the place and have them kind of walk around and look at each other's lily pads. You can even assemble them together and make your own big water garden and have other people come in and check it out. But I put in some art show prompts just to kind of facilitate a group dialogue about the creations. You can customize that conversation. You can just let it flow organically. You just want them showing their artwork to other people, and you want them seeing other people's responses to the same project. So once the art show is done, there's a self-assessment feature. You can print out the self-assessment for each individual kid, or you can just walk through these and have them rate themselves with their hand. They could give themselves a 3, a 2, a 1, a smiley face, a frowny face. But the statements are, I painted 5 plates, 1 blue, 1 green, 1 dark pink, 1 light pink, and 1 yellow. So if they painted that, they got through part of the studio project. The second one says, I traced stencils on the smaller plates and cut them into the layers of a water lily. So that tracing and cutting part is a big part of this project. So have them reflect on, how did I do on that part? Did I do great on it? Was I outstanding at tracing and cutting? Then I'm giving myself a smiley face. Was that a little rough for me? I might give myself a plain face or even a frowny face if I needed a ton of help. There's nothing wrong with needing a ton of help. Emphasize that with the kids. They're learning and they're growing, and this is how they're kind of developing those skills. But the third one says, I embellished each plate with oil pastels and glued the layers together. And so that has them thinking about, how they ultimately put that lily pad together. And then the fourth one is, I used my materials carefully and tried my best on this project. That's where they're talking about craftsmanship. So there's a spot for teacher comments. If you want to give any kids individual feedback, you can send that home with your kiddos, and that would mark the end of this unit. I did add in a couple extra storybook suggestions. If you have the time to go online or to a library and look at the tons of other Monet children's books out there, I think you will agree with me that there's a lot of really great options. So at any point while the kids are working, or at the end, whenever you may have time, you might want to consider letting them listen to another story about him, and maybe they can compare stories. You can build in a little literacy option there. Or you may end up liking one of the other stories better and swapping it out for the one I suggested. It was a toss-up for me, and I ultimately went with The Magical Garden of Claude Monet, but there were a couple other really good contenders. So you may decide, you have access to one and you want to go for that one. Up to you, but I put a big list in there for you so that you're aware of those other options. Anyway, that marks it, and I hope that you have fun with this one. I hope you will consider sharing photos or videos of your kids in action on this one. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I really hope that you enjoyed this and have fun.